They thought the storm had passed after the church girl said yes. But when her jealous ex returned with secrets and a plan, everything they built was tested. What happened next left the entire town holding its breath. Stay tuned because you're about to watch a beautiful story and find out what happened next. Hello, family. Welcome to Tales Haven. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. The sunlight spilled gently through the church windows that afternoon, casting a warm glow across the wooden pews. The service had ended, the crowd had thinned, and yet Julian and Grace remained behind, standing quietly under the old oak tree behind the church, where their story truly began. Grace's head rested on Julian's shoulder, and her eyes were closed. She wasn't tired. She was at peace. Julian held her hand gently, not saying much, just taking in the silence. For the first time in a long time, there was no pressure to impress, no need to prove himself. He had nothing to give Grace today except the man he had become. And for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. "You're quiet," Grace finally whispered. Julian smiled. "I think I'm afraid if I speak too soon, I'll wake up and realize this moment isn't real." Grace chuckled softly. "It's real, Julian. Very real." They both sat on the wooden bench beneath the tree, watching as a few children chased each other in the field nearby. "I want to build a life with you," Julian said slowly. "One that's not flashy or loud. Just strong." Grace looked at him thoughtfully. "Strong doesn't mean perfect. You know that, right?" He nodded. "I know. And I'm okay with that now." She squeezed his hand. "So am I." Over the next several weeks, Julian and Grace continued to build their relationship, but not in the way people expected. There were no expensive vacations, no flashy date nights, and no announcements on social media. They chose to keep things simple and sacred. Julian spent more time volunteering, serving meals at the shelter, painting walls at the youth center, and helping clean up after church. He no longer showed up in designer clothes. In fact, one Sunday, he wore the same old shoes 2 weeks in a row, and no one noticed. Except Grace. And when she did, she smiled quietly to herself. Because that was the kind of man she had prayed for, not someone who had everything, but someone who was willing to give everything for a higher purpose. Then, one afternoon, Julian arrived at Grace's apartment with a large brown envelope in his hand. He looked nervous, but hopeful. Grace welcomed him in with a warm smile. "What's this?" Julian handed her the envelope. "Something I've been working on." She opened it slowly. Inside were typed pages, neatly bound, with a cover sheet that read, "The Stonewall Foundation. A new vision for second chances." Grace's eyebrows raised. "You're starting a foundation?" Julian nodded. "With my dad's support. But the vision is mine. I want to help people who've been overlooked, former prisoners, single moms, kids from broken homes. People who never had the chance I had." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she read the first few pages. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Where did this come from?" He looked at her. "From watching you. From listening to you. From seeing the way you live." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said gently, "You really are changing, Julian." He took her hand. "Because I met someone who didn't just say no, but showed me what yes should truly look like." Everything seemed perfect, until one quiet evening, just after Grace finished closing up the church office, a knock came at the door. She opened it and gasped softly. Standing before her was Daniel Wright, the man she had once thought she would marry. Her ex-fiancé. Tall. Confident. Wearing a crisp dark suit. His eyes scanned the small office, then landed on her. "Well," he said with a smirk, "looks like you're still doing the church girl thing." Grace stiffened. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you're with Julian Stonewall now," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "Big name. Bigger wallet. Tell me, Grace, how much did it take for him to get your attention?" She took a deep breath, her voice calm. "He didn't buy my attention. He earned my trust." Daniel scoffed. "Men like him don't change. They just adjust long enough to win." Grace looked him in the eye. "That's what you did, Daniel. You changed when it was convenient and left when it was hard. He didn't like that answer. Before leaving, he gave her one last warning. When he disappoints you, and he will, don't say I didn't try to warn you. And then, like a shadow, he disappeared into the night. Later that evening, Julian called. He was cheerful and excited to share updates about the foundation. But Grace's voice was distant. Are you okay? He asked. There was a pause. Then she quietly answered, someone from my past showed up today. Who? Julian asked, his voice tightening. Daniel. Julian's hand clenched around the phone. Did he threaten you? No, she said softly. He just brought back doubts I thought I had buried. Julian didn't speak right away. Then he said gently, you don't need to hide your doubts from me, Grace. I'll face them with you. Every one of them. Grace closed her eyes and sighed. Thank you. I just need time to clear my heart again. That night, Grace sat on her bed staring at the ceiling, asking herself the question no one else could answer. Did Julian truly change? Or was she just his greatest challenge yet? The morning sun peeked through Grace's window, but she didn't feel its warmth. She sat at her kitchen table with a mug of tea in front of her, untouched and growing cold. Her thoughts were far from the quiet room, still stuck on Daniel's visit the night before. His voice echoed in her head. Men like him don't change. They just adjust long enough to win. She hated that those words got to her. But they did. Meanwhile, across town, Julian sat in the Stonewall Foundation office, writing out plans for a community housing project. But no matter how focused he tried to be, his mind kept drifting back to Grace. He had heard something in her voice last night. Hesitation. Doubt. Distance. And he couldn't ignore it. He picked up his phone but paused before calling. Give her space, he reminded himself. You promised you wouldn't pressure her again. Instead, he sent a simple message. Good morning, Grace. Just thinking of you. Hope your heart is light today. No pressure to reply. Just wanted you to know I'm here. Then he put his phone down and prayed, not just for her to love him, but for her to have peace. Later that afternoon, Grace walked into the church office to begin her volunteer shift. Her best friend Nicole was already there, organizing donation forms. Grace tried to pretend everything was normal, but Nicole noticed. You're quiet, she said gently. Something wrong? Grace sighed and sat down. Daniel came to see me. Nicole's eyes widened. What? Why? He wanted to shake me, Grace said softly. He said Julian's just pretending to be different. Nicole frowned. Do you believe that? I don't want to, but the doubt is there. I've seen so many men change only long enough to get what they want. Nicole reached for her hand. And what has Julian done to make you question him? Grace blinked. She thought about it. She remembered the late nights Julian stayed to clean the church hall, the moments he quietly prayed during service, the way he helped a young boy from the shelter find a job without ever telling anyone. No, she finally whispered. He hasn't done anything wrong. It's just my fear talking. Nicole smiled. Then don't let fear speak louder than faith. That evening, Grace made a decision. She walked to the Stonewall Foundation building. It was almost sunset, and the golden light made the glass windows glow. She stepped into Julian's office and saw him sitting behind a desk, his head resting on his hand, looking tired but peaceful. He looked up and smiled the moment he saw her. Grace, I didn't want to let doubt win, she said, standing in the doorway. So, I came to face it with truth. Julian stood, walked around the desk, and gently reached for her hand. You never have to pretend with me, he said. If there's doubt, let me walk through it with you. I'm not afraid of your fears. Tears formed in Grace's eyes. Daniel's words got into my head. But your actions, your quiet, consistent actions are stronger. Julian led her to sit down. Let me tell you something, Grace. You're not the challenge I had to win. You're the peace I didn't know I needed. She smiled through her tears. Then promise me one thing. Anything. Don't ever stop growing, not for me, but for you. Julian held her face in his hands. That's already my vow. Just as they shared that quiet moment, Julian's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. He opened it and read, "You may have fooled her, but I'm still watching. Let's see how long you last." There was no name, but Julian knew who it was. Daniel. He quickly deleted the message and chose not to tell Grace, not because he wanted to hide things, but because he didn't want to steal the peace they had just rebuilt. But deep inside, Julian knew something. Daniel wasn't done. Later that night, Grace prayed by her bedside. "God, I'm trusting you. If Julian is the one, give me peace. If he's not, give me clarity. But please don't let my past blind me to a blessing." And as she closed her eyes, she felt calm, because love wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. And in Julian, she was starting to see it more clearly each day. Julian woke up early the next morning, but peace didn't follow him. The message from Daniel still echoed in his mind. "You may have fooled her, but I'm still watching. Let's see how long you last." Julian had deleted the message, but the weight of it remained in his chest. Not because he was scared, but because he knew Daniel was desperate, and desperate men did stupid things. He decided to say nothing to Grace. He didn't want her to carry worry that wasn't hers. But something deep inside told him Daniel wasn't finished. And the next move might not be subtle. That Sunday, church was packed. Julian arrived early to help set up the chairs and fold the church bulletins, as he always did. He smiled, greeted the elders, and even helped carry groceries for the food pantry after service. Grace arrived a little later, dressed in a soft blue dress. Her hair was in a loose bun, and her smile made Julian forget, for just a moment, that trouble was coming. They sat together during service, and for the first 30 minutes, everything felt right. Until the back doors opened and Daniel walked in. Wearing a dark suit and that smug expression Julian would never forget, Daniel didn't sit at the back. Instead, he walked straight down the middle aisle and sat 4 rows in front of Grace and Julian. The room tensed. Grace went stiff beside Julian. He leaned over and whispered, "It's okay. He's just trying to make noise. Ignore him." Grace nodded, but her hands tightened around her Bible. After the service, as people began leaving, Daniel stayed behind. He walked up to Elder Russell, the same man who had supported Julian weeks ago, and quietly handed him an envelope. Then, without saying a word, he walked out. Julian saw it happen but couldn't hear what was said. Elder Russell looked troubled as he held the envelope. He turned and called, "Julian, may I have a word?" Inside the church office, Russell opened the envelope. Inside was a printed photo, Julian at a wild party 2 years ago, shirt unbuttoned, glass in hand, surrounded by 2 women in short dresses. There was also a copy of an old tabloid article titled, "Billionaire Bad Boy Julian Stonewall Spotted Partying on His Father's Yacht." Julian closed his eyes and sighed. "That's old. Very old." Russell nodded slowly. "I know. And I believe you've changed. But some members of the church council, they're starting to talk." Julian sat forward. "So, what are you saying?" Russell looked at him with sympathy. "There's going to be a meeting. Some people are questioning your place in the church's leadership activities." Julian swallowed hard. "Because of who I used to be?" Russell nodded. "Because they're afraid of who you might still be." Julian walked out of the office and found Grace waiting just outside. One look at his face, and she knew. "What happened?" she asked gently. He told her everything, the photo, the meeting, the doubts. Grace stayed silent. Julian said quietly, "I understand if you want to step away from me for now. I won't be angry." But instead of pulling away, Grace stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Your past doesn't scare me. Your growth inspires me. And if the world can't see it yet, I will stand beside you until they do." Julian's eyes filled with emotion. "You're too good to me." "No," she said softly. "I'm just doing what love is supposed to do. Believe when it's hard to believe." The next week was hard. People whispered more than usual. Julian stayed quiet. He kept serving, kept showing up, kept smiling through the discomfort. And when the church council met privately, he didn't beg or fight. He simply wrote a letter that said, "If my presence is more of a distraction than a blessing, I will step back quietly. But please know, my faith is not tied to a role. I came here to serve, not to shine. The council was silent. Then, surprisingly, Elder Russell stood and read the letter aloud to the entire church the following Sunday. And when he finished, he said, "Brothers and sisters, this is what real humility looks like. And if we turn away men who are truly trying to change, what message do we send to the world outside these walls?" The church applauded. Some stood. Even those who doubted began to believe again. But across town, Daniel watched the live stream of the service from his phone. His jaw clenched. They still accept him? After everything, he muttered. He picked up a bottle of whiskey and threw it against the wall. Glass shattered. If they won't open their eyes, then maybe I'll have to force them. Julian was not the same man he once was. He had been tested, doubted, and dragged through whispers and judgment. But still, he stood firm. Still, he served. Still, he loved Grace with everything he had. And that love only grew stronger. Grace, too, was holding on, praying, believing, and trusting that what they had was real, even when it got hard. But while they moved forward quietly, Daniel was sinking deeper into bitterness. It was a rainy Thursday evening when it happened. Grace had stayed late at the church office, preparing lesson materials for the upcoming children's retreat. She was the last to leave. The halls were quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner and the patter of rain on the windows. She packed her things and stepped outside under the covered porch, hugging her sweater close. Her car was parked at the far end of the lot. She pulled out her phone and texted Julian, "Leaving church now. See you at home." She started walking toward her car, the parking lot almost empty. Then she heard it, footsteps. Not hers. Heavy. Close. Fast. She turned, heart pounding. Out of the shadows stepped Daniel, soaked from the rain, eyes bloodshot, hair messy, holding something in his hand. "Grace," he said sharply. "You still don't see it, do you?" Her heart jumped into her throat. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" "I gave you everything once," he said, voice shaking. "And you threw it away. For him." "Please leave," she said firmly, backing up. "You're not supposed to be near me." "I just wanted to talk," he said. "But now I want you to understand something. He's not better than me. He just played a better game." He raised the object in his hand. It was a framed photo. Julian and Grace smiling at a church fundraiser. The glass was cracked. The photo was ripped in half. "I'm going to ruin him," Daniel said. "Like he ruined me." That was when headlights flashed across the lot. Julian's car. He had seen the message and decided to come pick her up, just in case. When his car stopped and he jumped out, Daniel froze. Julian ran across the lot toward them. "Get away from her," he shouted. Daniel stepped back, startled, then dropped the photo on the wet ground and ran. Julian reached Grace and pulled her into his arms. She was shaking. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you. I'm here." She clung to him tightly, tears falling. He just appeared. "I was so scared." "I know," Julian said, holding her like he'd never let go. "But you're safe now." That night, Julian took her home and didn't leave her side. He called the police and filed a full report. The restraining order was updated, and this time, an arrest warrant was issued. Julian also had security cameras installed at the church and Grace's home. "I never want you to feel unsafe again," he said. "Not even for a second." Grace sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes still wide with fear. "I keep asking myself," she said quietly, "why is he doing this?" Julian knelt in front of her. "Because people like Daniel don't want love. They want control. You broke free, Grace. And that makes him angry." She looked into his eyes. "Will it ever stop?" Julian kissed her forehead. "Yes. Because we're not fighting him alone." The next morning, Grace woke up to a surprise. Outside her house stood a small crowd of church members, Elder Russell, Nicole, and others, holding signs that said, "You are not alone. We stand with Grace and Julian. Love wins over fear." Tears filled her eyes. Julian stepped outside, took her hand, and said, "They came for you. To remind you that truth still has a voice." Grace smiled. It was the first real smile she had shown since the night before. Later that day, the police called. Daniel had been found and arrested at a motel just outside the city. It was over. The threats, the stalking, the shadows. And for the first time in months, Julian and Grace could breathe freely. That evening, they stood together under the oak tree behind the church, the same place Julian had once confessed his love. The rain had stopped. The sky was painted in soft pink and orange. Grace turned to him and said, "I never thought we'd survive all of this." Julian looked at her. "But we did. And I think it's time to stop surviving and start living." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small blue box. Grace gasped softly. "Julian?" He opened it to reveal a gold ring, simple but beautiful. He went down on one knee. "I thought I had everything before I met you. But I didn't even know who I was. You didn't just change me, Grace. You helped me find the real me, the better me. Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down her face. She nodded.
Yes.
Yes, Julian. The days after Julian's proposal were calm, peaceful, filled with joy. For the first time in a long while, Grace could sleep without fear. The tension in her chest had disappeared. The worry in Julian's eyes had softened into something new, certainty. They didn't rush the wedding. They took their time, not to plan a grand event, but to prepare their hearts. Julian met regularly with Pastor Lewis, learning more about what it meant to lead with faith, not pride. Grace continued teaching the children's Bible class and helping at the food pantry. Every evening, they sat under the old oak tree behind the church and talked about their dreams, about their fears, about the kind of home they wanted to build. No wealth, no spotlight, just love. 2 months later, it was a sunny Saturday morning. The sky over Riverbend was clear, and the church was filled with people dressed in soft colors. White roses lined the pews. Sunlight streamed through the windows, lighting the altar in a warm glow. Everyone had gathered. The same community that once doubted Julian now stood to celebrate him. Elder Russell smiled as he helped greet guests. Nicole stood beside Grace's mother, both dabbing tears before the ceremony even began. At the front of the church, Julian stood nervously in a fitted gray suit. No flashy tie. No expensive watch. Just a simple gold chain tucked under his shirt, a gift from Grace weeks ago, with a tiny cross charm at the end. Charles Stonewell, Julian's father, sat in the front row. He wore a clean black suit and a proud smile. When someone beside him whispered, "That boy really changed," Charles quietly replied, "He became a man." Then the music began. Everyone stood. Grace entered slowly, arm in arm with her uncle, as her father had passed years ago. She wore a white gown that flowed like clouds, her hair tied in a soft bun. No crown. No diamonds. Only a white lily in her hand, and a smile that glowed brighter than any jewel. Julian's eyes welled with tears. He had waited a long time to be loved like this. But it was worth every second. When Grace reached the front, the pastor smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here not just to witness the joining of two lives, but to witness a testimony. A journey from pride to humility, from pain to healing, from fear to love." Grace and Julian held hands tightly, eyes locked. The pastor turned to Julian. "Do you, Julian Stonewell, take this woman, Gracelyn James, to be your wife, your partner, your closest friend, in joy and sorrow, in sunshine and storm, for all the days of your life?" Julian's voice was strong. "I do, with all my heart." The pastor smiled at Grace. "And do you, Gracelyn James, take this man, Julian Stonewell, as your husband, your leader, your encourager, to walk beside him in faith and love, as long as you both shall live?" Tears filled Grace's eyes as she whispered, "I do." They exchanged rings. And when the pastor finally said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, you may kiss your bride," the church erupted in joyful claps and laughter. Julian leaned in and kissed Grace gently, not as a man claiming a prize, but as a man honoring a promise. The reception was held outside on the church lawn. The decorations were simple, Strings of white lights, picnic tables with sunflowers, a small choir singing softly in the background. Charles stood to give a toast. He raised his glass and said, "There was a time I believed money made a man powerful. But watching my son, I've learned that love makes a man strong." Julian hugged his father, both holding back tears. Grace sat with Nicole, laughing about how Julian had almost tripped on the aisle carpet. Joy filled every moment. There were no big cameras, no news headlines, no social media posts, just community, peace, and love. Later that night, the sun had set. Most guests had gone. Julian and Grace walked back behind the church, hand in hand, back to the oak tree where everything had begun. They sat on the same bench. The stars twinkled above them. Julian looked at her and whispered, "We made it." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "And we're just getting started." He kissed the top of her head and closed his eyes. For once, there were no questions left to ask. No fears left to fight. No shadows left behind them. Only a future built on truth, tested by fire, and sealed with grace. That brings us to the end of this video. If you find this story worth watching, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories. Like and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Your support and engagement encourage me to post more videos. Thanks for watching.